Good evening. I'm Toni Larson, Director of Action and Advocacy for the League of Women Voters of Colorado. It's a pleasure to have all of you attending this forum discussing the topics of voter access and voting security. Tonight, the Colorado Secretary of State will lead off. Jena Griswold will lead the discussion of these two important and linked topics. In addition, we will hear from two people from Clerk and Recorder's offices. Koppes, Weld County Clerk and Recorder, and Perl, Arapahoe County Deputy Director of Elections. Andrea Wilkins, staff lobbyist for the League of Women Voters, will moderate the forum. If you have questions to ask, please type them in the chat box, and time allowing, we will get to them. This forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Colorado, an organization that strictly does not support candidates for office, but does take positions on issues of particular interest to the organization and educates its members and the public on these issues. Now I will turn the forum over to Andrea Wilkins, who will moderate the discussion.
Thank you, Toni. We're excited to be joined by our first speaker tonight, Colorado Secretary of State, Jena Griswold. Secretary Griswold is the 39th Secretary of State and just the 10th woman to be elected to a constitutional statewide office in Colorado history. She's the youngest elected Secretary of State in the United States. As a passionate defender of access to elections, Secretary Griswold just led one of the largest democracy reform packages in the nation, including increased access to voter registration, increased polling locations and mail-in ballot drop boxes across Colorado, including on tribal lands and public universities, and increased transportation of money in politics and lobbying. Secretary Griswold will be providing us with updates tonight on the work of her department, on Colorado's recent primary elections, and on voter access and election security issues. Welcome, Secretary Griswold. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to see you. I wish I could see all the participants. I welcome you from my home to your home. I hope everybody is doing really well. You know, Colorado is just taking the mantle when it comes to leadership. And that's one of the great things about being a Coloradan is that we just all value, I guess, craft beer and elections. Because we have some of the most accessible elections in the nation. And thank God for that, because we're really well poised to be able to lead the nation and maintain and fortify our democracy during COVID-19. So I'll talk a little bit about our state primary and then talk in general. I know there's probably some questions on people's minds from the president tweeting about well, he tweets a lot. We could go through tweet by tweet by tweets to talk about them just of today and how they relate to elections. But to start off, you know, we'll start off with the tweet. Today, the president tweeted that we should consider moving the general election, or that he would consider moving the general election. And we got a lot of questions about that. But I do want to make it very clear to everyone that he has absolutely no authority to move the election. So that shouldn't be at the top of your worry list. Our election will be on November 3rd, and we believe that it will just be a great election, just like normal. And I do think it's really important to remember just why it's so important to have that access to our democracy. And that's the moral or the value that has been remembered throughout our history, including during the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Great Depression. America has been dedicated to our elections, and a presidential election has never been canceled or moved. And this year will be no different. You know, here in Colorado, we're ahead of a lot of other states. I would go so far to say ahead of every single state because of the Colorado election model that values voters. You guys know here, you register to vote, a ballot is mailed to you, and then you return it, either in the mail by a drop box or even by voting in person, whether you have the ballot on you or not. And it's pretty simple. It's not a complicated system, and it allows for great accessibility. And it turns out that we were well prepared to just continue to have great elections during the pandemic because of our use of mail ballots. To share with all of you, my mom's a nurse, and she was working on a COVID ward, saving people's lives. And I just think it's so important to prioritize the protection of our lives and our democracy, and mail ballots help us do both of those things because they help us social distance and they help us stop the spread of COVID-19. And they help protect people like my mom and other frontline workers who are fighting for Colorado. So, we are really well posed to have great elections, and we did in our statewide primary. My office pushed and encouraged Coloradans to really use their mail ballots like never before, and we did. 99.3% of all ballots were mail ballots, so returned by the mail or a drop box. And just about a little under 11,000 people went to vote in person. That in-person access, by the way, is still very important. It's people who have moved or people who didn't receive a ballot or even people who are registering for the first time. And about half of all voters who went to vote in person, by the way, were under the age of 34, which makes sense. Younger people, I'll say I'm over the age of 34 just by 1 year. But younger people move more, right? And especially with COVID-19, may be experiencing a higher degree of economic issues with the pandemic. So we need to be able to keep that access open. And I will say I'm just so proud of our state. We set a record turnout. And another little tidbit of fact that I thought was really important, unfortunately, because of the misinformation being spread, was that Republicans actually used mail ballots at a higher rate than Democrats in our state primary. And why that is so important is because the president is lying consistently about mail ballots. And I really think it's reprehensible, some of the rhetoric coming out of the White House and out of the top elected leader in this nation that is designed to suppress turnout in November. The baseball season just is kicking off, and what we are seeing out of the president is akin to a pitcher trying to call his own strikes. That's just not how baseball works. That's not how our democracy works. We work, we should work as a nation from a fair set of rules that lead to fair results that the voters ultimately choose. But to see Republicans use mail ballots in such a high degree, I think is great because it just really shows the work of people like the county clerks, organizations like League of Women Voters, all the different organizations and the support systems that supported mail ballots. In Colorado, it's been supported by both Republicans and Democrats. And of course, my predecessor, Wayne Williams, just did a great job in implementing our mail ballot system, and he should be really commended. In the last election, I issued a series of also emergency election rules to make sure that in-person voting was as safe as possible. If we had voting and someone were to get sick, like in Milwaukee, where over 70 people contracted COVID-19 from the polls, of course, that is a bad result. That does not protect lives. And it also does not protect our democracy because we are suddenly inserting a reason for people to second guess going to vote. So I had issued a series of rules, including social distancing at the polls, election officials wearing masks and other PPE, and also the sanitation of voting equipment. And those, we also offered a 32-page guidance document, which was pretty long. And I know a lot of the clerks were on top of it, like Carly, I think she's speaking, and she could tell you about her experience in Weld. But overall, we are in a really strong position. We just came out of a fantastic election with our state primary. We're going to be in a strong position for November. And I think, again, one of the great things about Colorado is Coloradans turn out to vote. So we are expecting high turnout in November and just continuing to showcase our elections. And the last thing I will say is that I think it's very important that all Americans have the same type of access that we do. And that's why I have been calling for the nation to move to vote by mail for all. I've been working with other secretaries of state, and our elections division has been sharing best practices and tools for other states. And I will say one of the silver linings when it comes to elections in the pandemic is the expansion of the use of mail ballots this year. To share some figures, in 2016, less than 25%, it's 23 or 24% of Americans cast their ballot in the general by mail. The forecast so far are guessing that up to or over 75%, so I think they're putting it at 76% of Americans will have that access. So that is a vast expansion of mail ballots, which means a vast expansion of access to the polls. So that's really exciting, and Colorado has been there leading the way, and I'm just so proud to be able to do this work as your Secretary of State. And with that, if we have time, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Secretary Griswold. This is Toni talking, and I have a question for you. So we are interested to know what you are thinking about online voting. What are you predicting, and what are you thinking about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think the motivation behind it is something I agree with. Voting should be accessible. And that's why I'm so proud that in Colorado we have online voter registration. Believe it or not, some states still don't have that. We have early voting, election day registration, and of course, mail ballot, because we want to make it accessible to voters. I do think, being that we're in the COVID-19 crisis, it's important to remind everybody we're also in the crisis of foreign countries trying to undermine our elections. And at this point, we need to make sure we're investing heavily in our cybersecurity. And I do not believe that the technology is at a place with any type of online voting system where we could implement it in the state of Colorado at this point.
Could I follow up on that?
Sure.
You mentioned security systems, and can you talk a little bit about the security in Colorado?
Absolutely. Not only are we considered the most accessible state in the nation to cast a ballot, we're also considered the securest state to cast a ballot. The Washington Post named Colorado under my predecessor the safest state, and I've been doubling down on election security. And to share with everybody who is tuned in and participating, you cannot hack the vote in Colorado. We have a voter verified paper ballot. We make sure that none of the voting equipment, if a voter uses it, is connected to the internet. And then we do something afterwards called a risk limiting audit, which shows us to a statistical degree of certainty that the results are correct. But with that, we have election support systems, like our online voter registration system or our statewide poll book that we need to protect. And we're considered on the leading edge. Even to the extent that President Trump's own former DHS Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, commended us for our leadership in cybersecurity. And like I said, I've been doubling down. Just 2 weeks ago, I want to share with you guys, I made the best hire. I stole someone straight out of DHS who was leading all the coordination against election cyber attacks and disinformation. He's now working for the state of Colorado in my office. His name's Nathan Blumenthal. So he was acting assistant secretary against counterterrorism and elections for DHS. And he is supplementing our already fabulous team. We have over a 40-person IT team, our own security team that are just really, really good. And he's going to be adding on to that expertise and leading a team called Rescue. Which is going to be focusing on how to, number one, add more assistance to the counties so that we have more manpower to go into the counties and help them, but also think about strategies as how to combat disinformation and how to combat the innovative ways that cyber attacks are coming in. So overall, we're really proud of where we are. We're going to further invest in our cybersecurity with some of the federal CARES money. And we're just going to keep on leading forward. And when DC refuses to act on something so important as protecting our election infrastructure, Colorado, just like we do with vote by mail, we're going to lead the way. And that's exactly what we're doing.
You might mention what DHS is.
Oh, absolutely. Department of Homeland Security.
Thank you.
Thank you for that catch.
Andrea, do you have a question?
Yes, we do have some more questions. Secretary, can you tell us what is being done to further expand voter access in Colorado?
Sure. So in 2019, we partnered with the League of Women Voters and we passed the Colorado Votes Act, which, man, oh man, that was a good idea in retrospect because we added a lot more voting locations and also mail ballot drop boxes. So I provided the funding, partial funding for the majority of, 91 drop boxes in that legislation. Which to put in perspective, we have about 360 drop boxes right now across the state, so that's a lot. And then I just announced a couple months ago that I would fully pay for, if the counties want them, up to 100 extra drop boxes. So we want to increase that access. We also made sure that younger people and people on tribal lands could have their voices heard, guaranteeing a polling location or a drop box. We passed parolee reenfranchisement, automatic voter registration. We enabled 17-year-olds to cast a ballot if they'd be 18 by the general. So we're at the forefront of voting access, and we will remain there. And by the way, all the extra access when it comes to voting locations and drop boxes, again, puts us in a better spot to be voting in a pandemic. Because even if people do need to vote in person, we don't want everybody cramped into one polling center. And you just have to see the pictures from Milwaukee or from Georgia, people having to get into single file line, waiting literally 5 to 6 hours. In Atlanta, they were waiting until 12:35 in the morning. And no, that's not good for COVID-19. But also, I think it's important to say, especially the day of the funeral of the wonderful Congressman Lewis, who literally bled for our voting rights, that voter suppression is systemic racism. It is. It's not by surprise that predominantly the folks who were disenfranchised in Georgia in their primary were Black Americans. And on the heels of all the protests against police brutality of Black Americans, to see those images coming out of Atlanta was just horrendous. So I think we have to continue to fight for access where we can in Colorado, but we really have to focus on people like Congressman Lewis's legacy and rededicate ourselves until Election Day and thereafter, to fight until every single community can have their voices heard and the access they need. And I truly believe one of the tools to achieve that is the expansion of vote by mail for all.
A bit of a follow-up to that, I can see from our chat and some of the questions that are being entered, a lot of our participants tonight have got concerns about the solvency of the Postal Service. What are your concerns in that area? And would you encourage people to use ballot drop-off boxes as opposed to mailing them?
Well, I will say, in the words of another, another famous elected official. I'm not famous. In the words of a famous elected official, I would say I have a plan for that. So we are planning contingencies with the post office. And I will preface the whole conversation by saying the majority of Coloradans actually use drop boxes. So of everybody who's using their mail ballot, the majority, it's about 75%, depending on the election, are actually dropping the ballots at a drop box. That's why it's so incredible and exciting that we're adding, literally, since I took office, the funding for 191 extra drop boxes. That means a difference. I will say, and I do think we have to push against misinformation and the lies about vote by mail coming from President Trump. And he is using different tactics to try to suppress the vote in November. Whether it's the fantasy that foreign agents are going to be able to trick everybody with their mail ballots, that's more we would read in a spy novel rather than in real life, to the idea that mail ballots are rigged when we have a history of clean elections, and I can go through that. to the defunding of the post office, which has been a major prerogative of that administration, and ties very closely to the opposition of vote by mail. I will say, I do think it's part of an effort to make sure that our elections are less accessible rather than more accessible. And I think it's a real shame. But with that said, I was very happy to see today that the Department of Treasury, the Secretary of Treasury, finally signed, maybe it was yesterday or today, but he signed the loan that Congress said that he should give a loan, $10 billion to the post office. So that loan is signed. I imagine the money is wired. So the post office's solvency issues have been greatly reduced. But of course, you know, we are hearing reports out of the post office about not being able to do overtime, and, you know, their motto of delivering mail no matter what the conditions is being chipped away at. But I'm generally very confident because how we have our mail ballot system set up when the ballots go out, how they're processed, that will be good here in Colorado.
During the last legislative session, which was rudely interrupted.
Rudely interrupted, yeah.
And
that's true.
There was discussion about having a lot more translated ballots and also a lot more access for people with disabilities. And can you comment on that? Would you comment on that, please?
Sure. Absolutely. So in 2019, and I'm sure you all supported it, I'm sure Andrea is the one who pulled it over the finish line. One of the many pieces of legislation that were passed in the democracy reform package was an increased access for voters with low eyesight. So basically innovating how we were delivering ballots to people with low eyesight so that they could actually vote their mail ballot at home. So that was passed in 2019, and we built that system very quickly. Our elections division just went to work. It was a big lift, and that was already in place for the 2019 election. There was a piece of legislation that I assume will eventually be passed. It's been around for a while, lowering. So basically there's a federal law that says when ballots have to be in different languages. So this would lower the threshold, and also was going to have us in my office set up a call center in like 10 different languages. So unfortunately, that one of the many issues that just did not have time to even be debated. But you know, outreach is really important to me. Growing up, just working class in Estes Park, there's Estes Park and the tourist towns in Colorado and the big cities have very diverse communities. And we want to make sure all Coloradans have access. And that's one of the reasons that in our voter engagement, we do everything in Spanish and English. I actually do interviews on Telemundo and Univision in Spanish. I have good days and bad days in my fluency, but always hope for a good day when I'm doing an interview in Spanish. And that outreach, I think, is really important, and we're going to continue to do.
Andrea, do you have some more chat room questions?
We do actually have a whole lot of questions, and Secretary, I know that you have a hard stop at 7 o'clock. I'm wondering if it would be possible for us to try and capture some of these and follow up with your office after the fact.
Absolutely.
To get some answers, because
Sure.
we have a lot of questions both in the chat box and then in the Q&A, and unfortunately I just think time will not allow. If we could maybe sneak one last question in, you know, having come off the recent primary and, you know, seeing how those have played out in other areas, do you feel that there were specific lessons learned that we really need to be mindful of going into November?
For Colorado or for the nation?
For both, actually.
Yeah, I would say Colorado's election went really well. And I just really want to commend all of our county clerks. If you can imagine you're on the heels of the presidential primary, and then literally a week later, the state starts to close down because of a pandemic. And then you have to do a state primary. That's a lot of stress and a lot of planning, and everybody really rose to the challenge. My elections division just worked around the clock. The county clerks really worked really hard, and I think we got to a really good place. And largely our elections went off without major problems. So we were really, really proud of obviously the tremendous turnout. To set a turnout record for our state primary during a pandemic is telling. And what it tells is that the Colorado election model works. So I'm really happy with where we are with the state. As a state, we'll continue to push out innovations and resources, and of course work with our wonderful county clerks as we're gearing up for November to make sure that our elections are still very accessible. And if a Colorado needs to vote in person, it's safe and people never have to choose between their health and their ballot. I would say there are major lessons learned for the nation. Again, look at Milwaukee, look at Georgia. We had people having to choose between their health and casting a ballot, or literally having to risk their health to cast their vote. And that is not a scenario that should have to be in the United States. We are the greatest country in the nation, and we have to treat access to our elections as something to be treasured. So that's why I've been working so hard to expand vote by mail for all. I do believe that all Americans should have the rights Coloradans have, that no one should be forced to risk their health to cast a ballot. And frankly, people like my mom, who at the time was working exclusively with COVID patients, should have access and not have to go to the polls if it's just not safe for them or for others to do so. So we've been really working, and we are seeing huge results. I'm just so proud of what we are seeing. And it's not just, by the way, oh, adopt a mail ballot and you're good to go. We're talking about our whole system. We're talking about sending out ballots 3 weeks beforehand. You know, we saw in Philadelphia, they were sending out ballots even a couple days before the election. That does not logistically work. So we did see a lot of states do their elections really well. We also saw states that need to continue to think about how they're going to execute both in-person voting and mail ballots. And all I can say is, you know, we got to sound the alarm. You guys, by the way, you guys, your group has been suing across the nation for good. You just got in New Hampshire. They had some crazy law that if you wanted to vote a mail ballot, you had to get it notarized with 2 witnesses. During a pandemic, that is very hard. Not during a pandemic, that is very hard. You guys sued and you got that law taken off the books. So there's all these little things across the nation that we can improve. The good thing is we do have enough time, but it requires everybody digging in and demanding that our nation puts our elections above partisan politics, in that we demand of our elected officials in Congress to fund elections, and in the states to do the right thing to do the right thing. And the right thing is making sure that their voters have access in November for such a big historical presidential election.
So, well, thank you very much for your time this evening, and we will see you again, no doubt. Hopefully about campaign finance. I'm still saying something about finance. And
Well,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm excited to work with you guys on campaign finance. So absolutely.
Yeah, good. And we will send you some more questions. And thank you very much for offering to take those and answer them. So have a good evening, or the rest of it anyhow.
Thank you. See y'all later.
Yeah, thank you. And Andrea, you want to take over and talk to the 2 people from the clerk and recorder's offices?
Absolutely. We're going to shift over to our next speaker. We're fortunate tonight to be joined by Carly Koppes, the Weld County Clerk and Recorder. Ms. Koppes was born and raised in Greeley, and she currently resides in Briggsdale, Colorado. She's been working with the Weld County Clerk and Recorder's office for 16 years and is the youngest person to be elected to the position of Weld County Clerk and Recorder. Ms. Koppes is currently serving as the president-elect for the County Clerks Association of Colorado and will become the president of the association in January 2021. She'll be speaking to us tonight about implementing voter protections and election security in Weld County. Welcome, Carly.
Thank you all very much. I do appreciate you allowing me to join you this evening. And I'm so glad that it's not raining on me anymore. So that's always a good thing up here in Weld County. We've been having some great weather. But I am Carly Koppes. I am the 29th Weld County Clerk and Recorder. And I do appreciate the opportunity to come join the panel this evening to talk about how awesome the Colorado clerks are and how well we have been doing during this whole interesting year of 2020. We started off the year in 2020 with the first presidential primary in the 20 years, and we did a fantastic job with that. We have a lot of newer and younger clerks among our ranks, and we have been able to support them along with a very new and young Secretary of State as well, who we have been able to also help grow her in her position. We had, like I said, a very interesting time right after we finished our presidential primary here in Colorado, which we participated on Super Tuesday. We got hit with COVID, and it was a very interesting time. We were still somewhat wrapping up that presidential primary. So we have a lot of contingency plans here in Colorado, very fortunately that we do, and a lot of love for technology here in Colorado. So a lot of our county clerks, we were able to get together and utilize this technology to perform and actually finalize the presidential primary election, as we were also trying to do all of our other duties. The Colorado County Clerks, we not only run and administer elections, but most of us also have other departments that are very public facing as well. So as we were working through finishing up and wrapping up the March primary election, we were automatically thinking about how is the June 30th state primary election going to work. And one thing as county clerks are very good at is planning. We're all super organized planners, and that definitely helps us out during times of crisis. We also are extremely good at contingency plans because we have a lot of years of experience with having to develop different things. Like I said, I was been in elections for 16 years now. This is my 5th presidential election cycle. My first one was in 2004. And since my time in the elections world, I've had to deal with flooding, I've had to deal with tornadoes, I've had to deal with massive winter storms. So we have a lot of contingency plans already kind of built in our county clerk's elections office. So when COVID came around and we had to start thinking about how are we going to protect the voters and how are we going to especially protect our election judges? Our election judges are the absolute most important key really for our elections, because we in the elections office, we get everything ready for the election, and we have great volunteers that we turn over our elections to, and those are our election judges. And we were always making sure that they were in the forefront of our planning and making sure that they may remain safe as possible while we were continuing to move forward to make sure our June primary election happened. Now, as county clerks, one of the biggest things that we emphasize amongst ourselves and our staff is that we stay apolitical. It is extremely important for us to stay apolitical. We don't get down in the weeds when it comes to politics. Our main purpose and goal is to make sure that every voter has the access that they need to be able to cast their vote successfully. So it's really important for all of us clerks to maintain out of that fray and stay focused on what's actually important, and that's making sure that every voter has that vote and ability to cast that vote. We did numerous hours with internally, in Weld County, I was spending numerous 7-day weeks, 50 plus hours every single week since March 13th, taking care and making sure that we were going down to the nitty gritty and getting into the weeds as we moved forward, planning for that June election. We did also have a couple of conversations with the Secretary of State's office to try and help and develop her rules and try and make sure that they understood the true implementation of the rules that she was passing down on us. We had some good dialect, and we were able to get some adjusted to better adhere to all of the different sizes and operations of the county. And we were able to move forward with the rules that Secretary Griswold did pass down. And we were all able to have extremely good, high turnout June primary election here in Weld County. I had an extremely high turnout, and 97% of those ballots came back to me in those 24-hour boxes. I am the size of about almost 4,000 square feet here in Weld County. So the whole state of Rhode Island can fit in with my borders. So I got a lot of land to cover and a lot of voters to cover as well. So we have 16 24-hour boxes that we've had for a couple of years. We were able to maintain those. We had fortunately great relationships with our voter service and polling center locations, and we were able to emphasize and make sure that they knew that we needed to maintain that social distancing and allow for voters to feel safe. But more importantly, again, our election judges knew that we were there to support them, and they were very front of mind for all of us in the elections world. Because like I said, we cannot do any part of an election without our amazing election judges. And we're going to continue to look at those. We've debriefed with our election judges to see what can we possibly tweak to, again, make sure that they feel comfortable in doing the job, because they are the absolute key. And I can't express, if you're an election judge, thank you so much. You make my job way easier when you are so dedicated to coming in and volunteering and doing your civic duty. This is definitely going to be a huge presidential election. Every single year, every single presidential, I feel like I keep saying that, but every single year the voters in Colorado continue to prove that we are here to vote and we're going to make our voices heard. And I couldn't be more prouder of our voters here, and I could not be more prouder than the election judges, my fellow county clerks, and their election staff. We are all very fortunate to have amazing election staff in every single county here in Colorado. And one thing is if you have questions, if you have concerns, reach out to your local county clerk and recorder. Learn and understand what we are doing at the local level, because we're the ones that are really truly administrating elections in the state of Colorado. We're the base of all of the functions. We're the ones that are making those decisions. We're the ones that are printing those ballots and getting everything ready for you, the voters. So if you have questions, you have concerns, make sure and reach out to your local clerk and recorder. We will be more than happy to have those discussions with you. I do tours, and I know a lot of my other clerks do tours as well during the election process. I post videos on my Facebook about behind the scenes information. I know Peg Perl from Arapahoe County, they have definitely done a great job with their communication, and I can't wait to see what they come up with for the presidential election. Peg has done an amazing job taking over the helm over in Arapahoe County, and very much look forward to continuing to work with her in that arena. With that, again, we know a lot of social media is happening, a lot of chatter, a lot of rhetoric is happening. And if you want to know what really truly is going on, a lot of us election officials all across the nation are using hashtag #TrustedInfo2020. So if you want to see kind of what's going on actually at the local level and the actual election admission level, make sure and just Google hashtag #TrustedInfo2020, and you'll see a whole bunch of good, solid information. Because again, us local people, we're the ones that can really break it down to you and really provide you with the knowledge that you may be seeking, and have that conversation. And plus, we're all your local elected officials, and we want to make sure that we're supporting our communities in the best manner that we possibly can. And so with that, if you have any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you.
So, Andrea, do you mind if I jump in?
No, not at all.
I mentioned, to the Secretary of State, the issues of translation and access and those. Could you comment on those from a local area perspective of how difficult or not of implementing those, and what your philosophy is about that?
So we have a lot of different levels of abilities and funding really at the local level. Any type of additional election reform for us really truly needs to be fully funded. A lot of our counties in Colorado have a lot of funding shortages, and COVID-19 is not helping with us having to reevaluate our motor vehicle operations, which brings in a lot of funding for our county level, and some of our other revenue generating operations have been greatly affected by COVID. And so one thing that I want to emphasize is any further election reform, especially in the state of Colorado, it does need to be fully funded at the state or federal level. Now, a lot of us counties, and particularly I can speak to Weld County, we are not required by the federal level to actually have any type of translation. However, we do our due diligence. We are our local voices, and all of us know our communities extremely well. You're not going to find another elected than, you know, kind of the local electeds that know the community as well as we do. So what we do here in Weld County, even though I am not required to do a single bit of translation on any type of level, I already go ahead and recruit bilingual election judges. I make sure that my website is completely translatable and also accessible through the ADA. We go above and beyond what we are actually required to do. You know, we have that floor and we're always going above it. So making sure that we're a part of that dialogue and context to have and further those conversations, so everybody's aware kind of what we're already actually doing and see what is needed to continue our efforts in that arena, because we've been doing it for a long, long time at the clerk's offices, not only in elections, but in our other departments as well, making sure that we're supplying our communities with the necessary translated materials that they are needing.
Okay, Andrea, maybe you can get some chat questions or ask Peg to talk, and then we can have some more Q&A.
Yes, I would encourage our participants to continue entering questions into either the chat boxes or the Q&A tab on Zoom, and we'll try and pick those up as we're able. I do see one that you know, I think is really a county specific question. I realize the answer might vary by county. But Carly, we do have a question asking whether or not there are enough election workers in the counties, especially in light of the fact that many individuals are retirees that work in that capacity, may not feel safe doing so. Are you concerned about capacity? And if so, are there things that individuals that they feel they're able to help can do to, you know, better support and facilitate the election?
Absolutely. I mean, election judges, like I said, are super important to us, but every single county, all 64 of us, do struggle with recruitment, especially because usually our age range is 55 and above. And of course, with COVID and, you know, when we were initially finding out information with COVID, that was kind of the area that people were most concerned about. They were the most vulnerable. And we tried, along with conjunction with the Secretary of State, to do a recruitment effort. We do rely heavily on the two major parties in Colorado to help us supply the election judges to us. But we are always wanting to and welcoming anybody to join your county level and experience an election firsthand, be a part of history, because every election is historical. There's always something special about it. And with that, we always try and recruit as much as possible, because we do understand, one, life happens. I mean, I've had an election judge have to drop out the day before because of an extreme personal matter. And we were able to, because of the recruitment efforts, be able to fill in for that election judge. But we're trying as much as possible. We know we're going to have a huge high demand, because every single voter service and polling center that is required to be open at minimum has to have 10 election judges. And we know for this presidential election coming up in November, it's going to be a very high turnout. We're projecting anywhere between a 90 and 95% statewide turnout, which means a lot of those voters, even though we're encouraging them to use their mail ballot and encourage them to use those 24-hour boxes to drop them off, there's going to be anywhere between 5 and 10% that are going to be coming and voting in person. And we want to make sure that we are, like I said, getting that PPE out to our election judges, making sure that we have voter service and polling centers that have plenty enough space to do that social distancing, and making sure that anything that we can possibly do to have those election judges feel comfortable, that we're communicating with them early and we're making it possible for them, because like I said, they are the absolute key to our success here in Colorado.
Well, thank you very much for that information. That's really helpful. And I think with that, we will turn to our next speaker for the night. We're very excited to have Peg Perl join us. Peg is the Director of Elections for Arapahoe County, and she came to this position in January 2020 with 20 years of experience in election administration and voting rights, money in politics, government ethics, and open records at the national, state, and local level. She helped design and enact Colorado's modern voting laws and state and city campaign disclosure reforms while serving as senior counsel for the nonpartisan Colorado Ethics Watch and as the principal of her own public policy and democracy education firm for nonprofit clients, Democracy TNG. She'll be speaking to us this evening about elections administration in Arapahoe County. Welcome, Peg.
Thank you, Andrea. And I know the secretary had to leave us, but thank you always to the secretary for her work and for the information she gives to everybody. Thank you to Clerk Koppes up in Weld County. It's been great to be able to work with her and all of the clerks. As she said, this has been a really busy year. So I came into this job in Arapahoe County as Director of Elections on the day that ballots were mailed to overseas and military voters for the presidential election, in the presidential primary election, so in January. So it's pretty much been nonstop ever since, but in a good way. So just to kind of give a little bit of a flavor of what Director of Elections kind of view of this election administration cake. You know, we have the Secretary of State layer who's doing a whole bunch of great work here in Colorado. We have our county clerks that are doing a whole bunch of great work in Colorado. And then in all of these county clerks' offices, you have someone who's either an election manager or director of elections, whatever the title is, who's just another layer in this cake, working with all of the staff here to make sure all of this works for the voters. Seeing and reading the chat, I have the advantage of going last to read the chat, so I'm going to tailor some of the things that I'm saying that what hasn't been said already. But I think there's a lot of things we have learned about COVID this year that honestly, they're very important for things like social distancing, but they're actually just really good voter service ideas that we came up with out of the necessity of COVID. But at least here in Arapahoe County, we will probably continue in some way. So for example, I saw someone in the chat mention curbside ballot pickup. Here in Arapahoe County, we did in the June election have a curbside ballot pickup program as well. And basically what that was is for any voter who didn't get their mail ballot or needed a new mail ballot, maybe their dog ate it or they just made a mistake and needed a new one, you could call in on the phone and request a ballot, a new mail ballot be printed out for you, and basically come up to any of our voter service centers. You would pick the day and time and location, and one of our election judges would prepare that ballot and bring it out to you in the parking lot in a specially marked parking space that said curbside ballot pickup, just like at Target or any other place that you're used to doing curbside pickup now. And we'd come out, the election judges would check your identification and do a lot of the things that normally you would do if you had to vote in person at a voter service center, but we could do it in the car, out in the parking lot, and be able to do that in a way that was safer and more direct for folks. To avoid contamination for COVID or shared spaces or people in the room. We got tremendous feedback from folks. We had 150 voters use that service, even though we just made it up and we basically proposed it on social media and in emails and things. And so we're going to do that again in November. And we actually had folks who were, you know, ADA had some mobility challenges who were like, you know what, even without COVID, this is an amazing service for me because I don't have to maneuver out of my vehicle and get into the voter service center. So I think you'll see that we'll probably do some version of that even once we get past COVID on the other side. So there's things that we're learning. We also, on the language access space, similar to what you were hearing in Weld County, we are also not required to do things bilingually by federal law, but we know our community here and we want to make sure they have the outreach they need. So we do translate all of our sample ballots, and we have a Spanish language sample ballot on our website and at our voter service centers. And then we also have contracted with a service called United Language Group, where at all of our vote centers and on our voter hotline, calling in for questions or things like scheduling your curbside ballot pickup, we actually have live interpreter services for over 100 languages. So the city of Aurora, a large part of the city of Aurora, for example, is in Arapahoe County. And there's a lot of different West African languages that are spoken and things that for me to try to have someone on staff who spoke all of those languages is a little bit unrealistic. So if we can contract with a service to go beyond some of those languages that we don't have capacity to handle in-house, that's what we're trying to do. Drop boxes are definitely a way that in Arapahoe County people are using to return their ballots. We have increased the number of drop boxes incredibly. We have added, by the time we're done by November, we will probably have 10 more drop boxes than there was in the presidential election of 2016. And if you count the fact that all of our vote service centers are also a place that you could just go drop off a ballot in the front at a ballot box that's manned instead of unmanned, we actually will have a total of 45 places in Arapahoe County that someone could just drop off their mail ballot if you're concerned about the mail, or if you're running late, or if you just want a really direct way to get it back to the county quicker. And that brings me to another point that someone brought up in the chat about starting to process ballots. I'm sure if she read that chat as well, Clerk Koppes was laughing a little about, do you start to work on the ballots before election day so you can get ahead? Yes, we definitely do. So all those election judges that we need to hire, which we'd love to have you guys apply for, they're going to be working almost the whole month of October. Doing different parts of that process, from receiving those ballots and doing signature verification, all the steps that we do, which are what make mail ballots not only accessible, but a reliable, secure way to vote. We work on that process all the way through. What we do not do is we do not actually hit like tabulate and find out the totals of how many votes there are for which candidate until 7 p.m. on election day. So that's the piece that waits, but all the processing. So if we can get 200 of our 300,000 mail ballots that we're expecting in November before election day, I will have people working on them. Trust me, not a problem. So we also need election judges in Arapahoe County. And one thing people don't know, you don't have to live in the county that you work in as an election judge. So there's a lot of people who maybe live in certain populated counties or in county near the border, and they think they have to be the election judge in their own county. You don't have to. Right now, when we all need so many, I would say reach out. If your county says, you know what, we don't need any more from your political party because we all need to have bipartisan balance, I would reach out to the neighboring county and see if maybe they could use help, because that's just important for all of the counties. So I want to make sure there's some questions that people maybe still have, but those were things that I saw that in the chat that I wanted to make sure you knew about from Arapahoe County's perspective. We are expecting, like I said, over 300,000 ballots at least coming back. And even if we keep in person to less than 1%, 1% of our voters here in Arapahoe County, we're still talking like 30,000 people that would come vote in person. So that's a lot, and that's why we have all these safety protocols for COVID that we're doing at our voter centers. We're trying to do the curbside pickup. We're trying to do as much as possible. One thing I would urge you all to do, I hate the phrase early voting because I'm a bit of a procrastinator and prioritizer. So if you say I'm early for something, I'm going to think, oh, I should have done 3 more things before I got here. I don't want to say we have early voting. We have 15 days of in-person voting. So if somebody needs to vote in person, we have 15 days to do that. And I'd love for people to take advantage of the fact that we now have an all-day Saturday. So Halloween, Saturday, October 31st, all the vote centers in the state will be open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So there's so many great costume ideas, right? Take them to the polls. If you have to vote in person, go grocery shopping and then go vote. So I really hope that people can just use all of those days if they do need to use in-person services, which is important for a lot of folks. Just not all on Tuesday would be really, really helpful, especially for COVID health precautions.
Well, thank you, Peg, and thank you for paying such close attention to the chat boxes and questions. It certainly made our job easier, and it's great to be responsive to some of the questions that we're seeing come in. Along those lines, I do see one question that came in as you were speaking, and I think it kind of relates to one that was asked a bit earlier. There's a question about what happens to undeliverable ballots, and another question about whether or not the counties have concerns over the anticipated wave of evictions that we're concerned is going to happen, and what's going to happen with the ballots that, you know, are going to get kind of confused in that whole process and may not actually reach the resident.
So we definitely have a round of undeliverable ballots here in Arapahoe County, being such a large county with a lot of people who move. So technically, the actual process is if a ballot is undeliverable, the post office returns it to us. We pay postage for the post office to send it back to us. So we get every single one of those ballots back. We scan them in to be able to update voter records. And what we do is, the process is we send out what's called a confirmation card, and we try to make contact with that voter. And when we try to make contact with the voter, that's the piece of information, not with a ballot, but with like a letter that can get forwarded from the post office, because we don't forward ballots, but we can forward a letter that says, hey, your last ballot got sent back to us. It looks like maybe you moved. Can you return this letter to us either with your new address, or if you moved out of state, can you just tell us, and we'll, you know, you can withdraw your registration. That's how we try to make contact with the voter. The other thing that happens a lot in Arapahoe County is that the ballot goes out, for example, in November, it goes out October 9th or 10th, depending on which mail day it goes out. We get the undeliverable ballot back. Somebody is sitting waiting for a ballot. It didn't get there. So when VSPCs open, they walk in and they say, I didn't get my ballot. And they look them up and say, oh, because you were on Grove Street and the ballot came back. And they said, oh, no wonder, I moved to Maple Street. And they update their address right there at the Voter Service Center and get a new opportunity to vote then with the new address. So again, that undeliverable ballot came back to us, but they still have an opportunity to vote. So if we do have a lot of people who have to move because of evictions, those ballots would bounce back to us, but all of those people would have the opportunity to still vote, because they could come into a center, they could call us, they could just update their registration online. If you update earlier in October, we can mail you a new ballot to your new location. So it's really more about getting the word out to everybody. If you've moved, no matter why you've moved, there are still 3 or 4 ways that you can vote, and it's not going to be held against you.
Well, thank you for that clarification. That's really helpful. I know we're kind of closing in at the stop time for this. I did see one question that came in, and I'm wondering if we can maybe touch on that before we close. To your point earlier about being able to be an election judge in any county, how can people go about discovering which counties need more election judges?
I mean, I would just say, like Arapahoe County and Weld County, we have the link and the information on our own county's website. So if you start with your home county, if that's where you want to go, you start there. And then if they don't need you as an election judge, they'll tell you. And then just go to the website of whatever county you're willing to try. If you really were willing to travel the entire state, God bless you. And you would just have to check in with those clerks to see. There isn't really like a database. The Secretary of State's office does have a recruiting tool on her website, but it doesn't tell you who needs it. It's just a place where you could put your name down and where you want to apply, and then she forwards that information to us. So it's really going to the counties directly. So hone in on which counties you're available for and contact those clerks.
Fantastic. Well, again, that's all very helpful information. I just want to take a moment to thank both you and Carly for joining us. There's just been a lot of fantastic information that's been shared tonight, and we really appreciate your time. And with that, I will turn it back to Toni for closing.
Well, I too would like to say thank you to the panelists tonight, Secretary Griswold and Carly Koppes and Peg Perl. And it's nice to see you again, Peg. The League intends to hold a number of these series of forums. We've had a couple already, And we will be including other panelists as well. We've had the Attorney General for one of them talking about the faithless electors and the Supreme Court case that he was involved in. The forums are primarily related to voting and voting issues, but watch for the announcement of our next forum, and we trust we will see you again. I might add that I have been doing some research on the suffrage movement and all that the women went through, particularly women, went through to get the vote. And we, of course, have been hearing a lot about Congressman Lewis's stress and strides and things that he has done over time. And that the fact that so many people have done so much work to get the vote for all of us, that I think it's really our responsibility to get out there and vote. So, you know, I know I don't have to say that necessarily to League of Women Voters people, but I just had to say it anyhow. So good night all, and be safe.